Your perception of freedom is the cheapest lie that you have sold to yourself. You believe that you manage your time, thoughts, and choices. But for the system and those who stand at the top of the social hierarchy, you are merely a unit of resource. In a world of predators, being free means being unclaimed and therefore available for consumption. Freedom without value is emptiness. If you are not expensive, you will be bought for a pittance and discarded once the last gram of your psychic energy has been extracted. I am not here to provide you with hope. My task is to dissect your vulnerability and demonstrate how the mechanisms of social control transform you into an obedient instrument. I am your strategist and analyst. We shall examine how to stop being a convenient victim and become a subject whose submission cannot be bought, and whose presence is prohibitively expensive. We begin the investigation of your dependency. If you have recognized yourself or your past reactions in the described patterns or character behaviors, please place a plus sign in the comments. This is not a sign of weakness, but rather the first signal that your brain has begun the process of deconstructing old habits. Chapter 1: The Illusion of Choice and the Architecture of Dependency. The lighting in the office of Marcus was adjusted so that the shadows appeared deeper than they truly were. Julian sat in a leather chair, feeling the cool air from the conditioner touch the back of his neck. 7 minutes had passed. 7 minutes of complete, viscous silence. Marcus did not lift his eyes from the papers, although Julian knew for certain that there was nothing important there. This was an information vacuum, a classic technique of suppression. Julian felt a slight anxiety begin to boil inside him. His brain, accustomed to social exchange, demanded a reaction. Perhaps I should speak first. Ask if he has reviewed the report. No, that would be a manifestation of weakness. But the silence is pressing against my temples. His palms became damp. He noticed how Marcus smiled almost imperceptibly with the corner of his lips without looking up from the folder. This micro-smile was a scalpel. Marcus was enjoying how Julian was consuming his own cortisol. Marcus finally raised his head. His gaze was unfocused, as if he were looking not at a person, but at a piece of furniture. Julian, he uttered softly, yet the clatter of steel was felt in that voice. I see your zeal, but why should I pay you the amount that you are requesting? There are dozens of free specialists on the market right now. Translation: you are a replaceable part. Your uniqueness is a myth, and I am now going to reduce your price to 0. Psychological X-ray. In this scene, we observe classic cognitive suppression through the use of silence and status dominance. When Marcus forces Julian to wait for an answer in silence, he activates the amygdala in Julian's brain. For our biological self, social ignoring is equated to exile from the tribe, which in ancient times meant death. The neurochemistry of fear is working against Julian here. The level of cortisol rises, forcing him to seek a way to appease the aggressor. Marcus utilizes value gaslighting. He does not criticize Julian's work directly. He calls into question his very necessity within the system. This creates an insecurity effect, where the victim begins to offer concessions themselves simply to regain a sense of security. Psychological precedent. To understand why Julian submits to pressure so easily, let us turn to a fundamental experiment in the history of psychology. The experiment of Stanley Milgram, conducted in 1961. The study showed that ordinary people are prepared to inflict severe pain upon another person by administering electric shocks if an authority figure in a white coat stands over them and says in a cold tone, "The experiment requires that you continue." Milgram proved that a human being is inclined to delegate their responsibility and will to whomever they perceive as the system or power. In life, this manifests everywhere. For example, in toxic relationships, one partner may endure devaluation and emotional blackmail for years because the other has created an illusion of their own exclusivity and high cost. A woman named Eleanor may forgive Marcus, another one from her personal life, for constant lateness and coldness because he has convinced her, "No one else will ever need you with such a character." This is the same mechanism, reducing the self-esteem of a resource so that it becomes cheap and obedient. Counter-Strike Julian took a deep, unnoticeable breath. He recalled the rule. The one who is the first to break the silence loses the space. Instead of making excuses or listing his merits, he leaned back in his chair, mirroring the relaxed posture of Marcus. "Marcus," he said, maintaining a pause of 3 seconds. "The fact that there are many free specialists on the market is excellent news for those who require an average result. But we both know, if you needed one of them, we would not be spending these 10 minutes in silence right now. My price is not a tax on your budget. It is insurance against your losses." Julian applied radical pragmatism. He ceased being the supplicant and became the offerer of a solution. He destroyed the script of Marcus by demonstrating that it was impossible to intimidate him with isolation. Lesson number 1. Never justify your cost. Justification is an admission of guilt for the fact that you exist. Either broadcast value as an indisputable fact or leave. Freedom is the right to leave without looking back at the price that is being offered to you. Sensory immersion. The office smelled of old paper and expensive cologne with notes of sandalwood. The scent of power that is not accustomed to resistance. Outside the window of the 42nd floor, the city spread out like a microcircuit, where millions of pixel people ran about their business, not even suspecting that their will no longer belonged to them. The gray sky pressed against the glass, but inside this room, the temperature had just changed. The cold calculation of Julian became harder than the steel of the office partitions. He was no longer a resource. He had become a player. You have already understood that silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of power. However, resting on the laurels of a single victory is the shortest path to utilization. In a world where everyone strives to appear stronger than they truly are, your true strength may lie in the demonstration of controlled weakness. This is a subtle game where you allow the opponent to taste victory in order to tighten the noose around their ambitions at the right moment. Remember, an expensive object is not the one that is always flawless. It is the one whose mistakes appear as part of a grandiose plan. We move to the second stage of your transformation. We shall learn to manage reality through controlled chaos. Chapter 2. The architecture of false vulnerability. The restaurant hall was bathed in a muted amber light. Eleanor sat opposite Julian, sipping an icy tonic. She was the embodiment of control. A perfectly straight back, fingers with a flawless manicure that never trembled. She represented the interests of a holding company that could erase the career of Julian with a single stroke of a pen. Julian intentionally chose a table near the aisle, where the constant movement of waiters created a background noise. He looked slightly disheveled. His tie was a bit loosened, and his gaze periodically darted toward the entrance door, as if he were wary of someone. Translation: I am giving her a signal that I am out of my element. I am feeding her predatory instinct. "Julian, you seem agitated," Eleanor said, and a barely perceptible note of superiority slipped into her voice. Translation: I see your weakness, and now I shall dominate this conversation. To be honest, Eleanor, the last 2 weeks have been difficult. Julian hesitated, twisting a napkin in his hands. Marcus is pressing me. The investors are nervous. I fear that if we do not sign this contract within the next 48 hours, the project will simply fall apart. He fell silent, looking at the table. Come on, Eleanor. Feel that sweet sensation of power. Believe that you have backed me into a corner. Your brain is now releasing dopamine, blocking critical thinking. You are already making plans on how to dictate terms to me. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. Her pupils dilated, a sure sign that she had swallowed the bait. Perhaps I can help you calm the investors, she said, and a dangerous excitement flared in her eyes. But the price for the risk that we are assuming must be revised. We want 35% of the share, not 25% as we had agreed previously. Psychological X-ray Julian is utilizing the technique of false vulnerability. In social psychology, this is a method of lowering the threshold of vigilance. When we see that our opponent is under stress or displaying weakness, our brain switches from defense/analysis mode to expansion/capture mode. A mechanism known as confirmation bias was activated in Eleanor. She wanted to see a victim in Julian, and he provided her with all the necessary evidence. The neurochemistry of dominance is at work here. Upon seeing a weak opponent, Eleanor experienced a surge of testosterone and dopamine, which led to a narrowing of her focus of attention. She stopped analyzing why Julian, a man who only yesterday was a rock, had suddenly become so open. She made the ultimate mistake. She took the desired for the reality. Julian, meanwhile, maintained a cold center, using his anxiety as a mask. Psychological precedent. To understand the effectiveness of this maneuver, let us turn to the classic study by social psychologist Elliot Aronson, conducted in 1966, known as the pratfall effect. In the course of the experiment, participants were asked to listen to recordings of interviews with candidates. One of the candidates was extremely competent and answered all questions correctly. In one version of the recording, this ideal candidate accidentally spilled coffee on themselves at the end of the interview. The results showed that people rated the ideal but clumsy candidate much higher than the simply ideal one. Why? Because the demonstration of a small controlled weakness makes a strong player more human and less threatening. In the case of Julian, his panic made him an easy prey in the eyes of Eleanor. She stopped expecting a strike from him, and that is precisely the state required to conduct a counterattack. In life, we see this when a weak wife forces a strong husband to fulfill any of her whims, using tears as a tool of strategic planning, or when a subordinate named Alex makes the manager Marcus feel like a savior in order to receive a salary increase. Counterstrike, Julian slowly raised his eyes. His gaze changed instantly. The nervous twitch disappeared, and his hands froze on the table, creating a perfect lock. 35%, Eleanor? His voice became 2 tones lower and colder. An interesting proposal. That means you confirm that your holding company is so interested in this project that it is ready to enter into a conflict with Marcus for the sake of an extra 10%? This is valuable information. He maintained a pause, observing how bewilderment was reflected on the face of Eleanor. You see, those 48 hours I spoke of, that is the time after which the offer from your direct competitors comes into effect. And they offered me 40%. But I came to you because I thought that you valued partnership higher than momentary gain. Now I see that I was mistaken. Eleanor froze. Her victory turned to ash in a single second. She had just revealed her cards, showing how much she needed this contract. Lesson number 2. Your weakness must be your most guarded asset. Show it only when you want the opponent to come within striking distance. Remember, when you appear weak, you control the expectations of the enemy. And the one who controls expectations controls the finale. Sensory immersion. It became noticeably colder in the restaurant. The sound of clashing cutlery now reminded Julian of the clatter of swords in an empty hall. The air smelled of ozone, as it does before a storm. Eleanor looked into her glass, where the ice was slowly melting, turning the noble drink into tasteless water. Her confidence evaporated, leaving behind only the bitter aftertaste of realization. She was not the hunter, but the target that had been lured into an open space. Julian straightened his tie, this time perfectly even, and this gesture put a period at the end of their conversation. Your memory is the most unreliable witness that history has ever known. You believe in the objectivity of your memories, but the truth is that reality is plastic. Those who know how to manipulate your perception are capable of making you doubt not only your words, but also your eyes. To become truly expensive, you must learn to protect your architecture of reality, and if necessary, destroy the architecture of others. Welcome to the third level of our analysis. Here, we shall dissect the mechanisms that cause people to lose the ground beneath their feet. Chapter 3. Deconstruction of Reality and the Right to Truth. The glass walls of the conference room of Marcus reflected the cold light of the lamps. On the table lay that very folder because of which a war had been waged yesterday. Julian remembered clearly. Marcus agreed to a bonus of 7% on the condition of fulfilling the quarterly plan. This was stated clearly in the presence of the secretary Sarah, exactly at 1400 hours. 7%? Marcus raised an eyebrow with a look of sincere, almost fatherly bewilderment. Julian, it seems to me that you are overworked. We discussed 4%, and only in the event of overfulfilling the plan by 10 points. Translation: your memories are erroneous. Your reality is a hallucination. I am the sole source of truth in this room. Marcus did not simply deny the facts. He did it with a frightening conviction. He slowly walked to the window, folding his hands behind his back, and his reflection in the glass appeared more massive than the original itself. Ask Sarah if you do not believe me. He threw over his shoulder. Translation: I have already prepared the ground. You are alone against the system. Julian felt the world around him begin to vibrate slightly. This was not fear in its pure form. It was cognitive dissonance. His brain was trying to reconcile two incompatible facts: his clear memory and the unwavering confidence of an authority figure. A momentary hesitation, an almost unnoticeable trembling of the eyelids. And Marcus already knew. He had won. He saw how Julian began to search for the error within himself, rather than in the lie of the boss. Psychological X-ray. What Marcus did is called gaslighting. It is a form of psychological abuse, the goal of which is to make the victim doubt the adequacy of their perception. Using institutional pressure and involving false witnesses, or the hint of them, the aggressor destroys the internal foundation of the personality. When the reality of a person is under attack, their brain switches on a defense mechanism. To reduce the level of stress from conflict with authority, it begins to adjust memories to the imposed version. This is biologically conditioned. A loner who does not agree with the leader is historically doomed. Marcus exploits your ancient instinct of submission to the pack to save 3% of profit. Psychological precedent. In 1951, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted a series of experiments on the study of conformity that forever changed our understanding of social reality. A subject was shown 3 lines of different lengths and asked to say which one corresponded to the standard. It was obvious, but Confederates were in the room who, on the command of the experimenter, gave a deliberately incorrect answer. The results were frightening. 75% of participants agreed with the obviously false opinion of the majority at least once. Many of them later admitted that they truly began to see the lines differently under the pressure of the group. In life, this occurs constantly. For example, in a corporate culture where Marcus is the leader, employees may ignore obvious corruption or management errors because everyone around says that this is the norm. A young girl named Lily may believe that her partner Oliver is a genius whom no one understands, although he is simply an unemployed manipulator, merely because he methodically destroyed her connections with reality and friends over the course of 3 years. Counter-Strike Julian closed his eyes for 1 second. He summoned to his memory the principle of radical pragmatism. He did not argue. To argue with a gaslighter is to admit that their version of reality has a right to be discussed. Marcus. Julian pulled a small voice recorder out of his pocket, although it was turned off, and placed it on the table. This was a bluff, a pure, false threat. My memory may indeed be failing me, so I am accustomed to trusting only metadata. Fortunately, our meeting yesterday was recorded. But let us not waste time on listening. Let us discuss why the figure of 7% seems disadvantageous to you now. Let us move from your memories to current interests. Julian seized the initiative. He refused to play the game of truth or lie and moved the conversation into the field of business analytics. He regained his status as an expensive player by showing that his reality was protected by evidence, even if it did not exist at that moment. Lesson number 3. Never defend your truth. Simply make it the only economically advantageous option. If someone tries to destroy your reality, do not prove that you are right. Prove that their lie will cost them too much. Your will to power begins with the control over your own gaze, sensory immersion. The room smelled of sterile cleanliness and the overheated plastic of servers. The whiteness of the walls was blinding, erasing the boundaries between the floor and the ceiling. An ideal space for getting lost. Julian looked at his reflection in the polished surface of the table. His face was motionless, like a mask of cold plaster. At that moment, he understood. The world is merely a set of interpretations, and the one whose interpretation sounds louder and costs more wins. Your journey is coming to an end, but this is merely the conclusion of illusions and the beginning of your true value. You have passed through silence, manipulations, and the destruction of reality. Now you must realize the final truth. In the world of social interactions, equality does not exist. Only dependency exists. Either you depend on the system, or the system begins to suffocate without you. Being free means being unnecessary. Being expensive means becoming the sole source of a resource that cannot be replaced. We conclude the dissection of your will. In this chapter, you will learn how to seize the control center and become the one for whom predators are ready to tear each other's throats. Chapter 4. Genesis of Dependency and the Triumph of the Will. In the boardroom, it smelled of ozone and fear. Marcus and Eleanor sat on opposite sides of the table. Their gazes were no longer directed at Julian. They were directed at each other, like the barrels of loaded guns. Julian sat at the head of the table. There was neither triumph nor aggression on his face, only an analytical void. Before him lay the restructuring plan for the holding company, which he had prepared over the last 48 hours. this document was not just a report. It was the only bridge over the abyss into which the company was flying after their internal conflict. Translation: I am no longer an employee. I am the architecture of your survival. To implement this scenario, I require authority of level 0, Julian uttered. His voice sounded steady without a single unnecessary intonation. Any interference from your side will lead to the immediate halt of all processes. You will both become bankrupt within 30 days. Translation: Your power is a decoration. My intellect is the only real asset in this room. Marcus clenched his fists so hard that his knuckles turned white. He was used to owning people, but now he felt that Julian had become oxygen for him. If he refused, he would suffocate. Eleanor was the first to break the numbness, nodding slowly. She understood that Julian had applied radical pragmatism. He made his value absolute, transforming their ambitions into his instruments. Psychological X-ray. Julian implemented the strategy of information asymmetry and the creation of critical dependency. In psychology, this state is called network centrality. When a person becomes a node through which all vital resources, information, connections, decisions pass, they acquire power disproportionate to their formal status. Here, the neurochemistry of dependency comes into play. When Marcus and Eleanor realize that Julian is their only chance for salvation, their brain begins to perceive him not as a competitor, but as a source of reward. At this moment, the nucleus accumbens of the brain is activated, which is responsible for the formation of habits and addictions. Julian ceased to be an expensive commodity. He became a biological necessity for them. His departure is now perceived by them as a physical threat. Psychological precedent. To understand how such deep dependency is formed, let us recall the works of Burrhus Frederick Skinner, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. In his experiments with the Skinner box, he studied operant conditioning and especially intermittent reinforcement. Skinner discovered that if a rat is given a reward, food, not every time, but in a random manner, the dependency on the process of pressing the lever becomes maniacal. The creature continues to press the lever even when the reward stops coming altogether. It becomes a slave to expectation. In life, this mechanism turns people into emotional or professional hostages. For example, a leader named Marcus may keep his employees in a state of constant stress, issuing praise or bonuses only occasionally and unpredictably. This creates an illusion for subordinates, such as Eleanor in another context, that they need to work even more to earn approval. Julian reversed this scheme. He became that very lever. Now Marcus and Eleanor are forced to press him, offering ever greater resources just to receive his intellectual reinforcement. He is the only one who controls the distribution of this feed. Counter-Strike Julian slowly stood up, not waiting for their final consent. He knew that it had already been obtained, on a biological level. "The decision is yours," he said, heading toward the door. "But remember, in this world, there are those who ask for permission, and those who give it. I no longer belong to the first category, and if you want me to stay, you will have to prove that you are worthy of it." Julian utilized the will to power according to Nietzsche. He did not seek justice or recognition. He simply occupied the place that had become vacant as a result of their weakness. He became the Übermensch within the framework of this office space, the one who sets the laws of his own value. Lesson number 4. Do not strive to be loved. Strive to be the one without whom they cannot breathe. Your value is the sum of problems that only you can solve. Become the only exit from the labyrinth, and then you will be able to dictate any terms to those who are lost in it. Sensory immersion. Julian stepped out onto the terrace. The wind at the height of the 42nd floor was sharp and clean, devoid of the smells of the city bustle. Below, in the endless canyons of the streets, millions of people continued to play at justice and freedom, remaining cheap fuel for the ambitions of others. Julian looked at his hands. They were calm. He felt a cold confidence pulsating within him. Amor fati, the love of fate that he had created himself. He was no longer part of the food chain. He had become the chain itself. The sky above him was steel, and in this infinite space, he finally felt his true price. It was limitless. Our investigation has concluded. The instruments are laid out before you on the surgical table of reality. And now it depends only on your will whether they become a scalpel for your triumph or a blade on which you cut yourself through carelessness. You must realize the final chord. In this world, there are no good or bad scenarios. There are only those that work and those that lead to utilization. The freedom that the crowds shout about is merely the absence of a goal and a master, which makes you an unclaimed resource awaiting its buyer. True eliteness begins where the search for approval ends and the architecture of dependency begins. Become the one whose absence causes the system to suffer an attack of suffocation. Become the one whose silence is more expensive than the cries of thousands of followers. Let your life turn into a perfectly tuned mechanism where every gesture is calculated and every emotion is merely a paint on the canvas of your strategy. Remember, when you accept the rules of the game, you become a player. When you create the rules yourself, you become fate. Ahead is an endless field of probabilities where the shadows of Marcus and Eleanor will meet you at every step. But now, you see through them. You are no longer a victim of circumstances. You are their sole author. Look in the mirror not to see yourself, but to make sure. The mask sits perfectly, and the gaze is devoid of doubts. Your new price is already set, and it is beyond the reach of those who are not ready to pay with their will. Amor fati. Embrace your fate and force it to serve you. Knowledge of the mechanisms of the psyche is your main freedom. Subscribe to explore the hidden facets of human behavior together. And be sure to write in the comments which psychological pattern or strategy we shall dissect next time. Let us seek the truth together.